In a massive medieval castle, picture being in charge of providing food for hundreds of starving knights, servants, and nobles. There were no freezers, refrigerators, or even iceboxes present. However, these stone forts somehow managed to preserve food for months or even years. Today it seems impossible, right? However, for centuries, castle kitchens perfected the art of food preservation by storing enough food to feed over 1,000 people for a year using surprising sophisticated techniques. What method did they use, then? Let's start underneath the castle. Medieval castle builders were on to something brilliant when they dug deep beneath their fortresses. It turned out that these enormous underground cellars served as nature's refrigerator, keeping a constant temperature of around 55 degrees Fahrenheit, or 13 degrees Celsius throughout the year. The cooler it got, the deeper they went, and the architects of the castle took full advantage of this natural phenomenon. The cellars weren't just simple storage rooms, they were carefully planned labyrinths where different foods found their perfect homes at different depths. Fresh meat, cheese, and milk were stored at the lowest levels, which reached high 40s. The wine storage was a few steps up, and I promise you that keeping the nobles' wine fresh was probably more important than keeping the meat from spoiling. Roots, apples, and other preserved goods were among the heartier items on the upper levels. Because they were so vast, these underground labyrinths frequently led servants astray. To retrace their steps, they began making chalk marks on the walls. Medieval breadcrumbs, if you will. Before they found one particularly unfortunate servant in Dover Castle sleeping next to a wine barrel. He had been missing for 2 days. His rationale: "I got lost and the wine helped me stay warm." He remained employed. Surprisingly, not everything went according to plan in these food vaults below ground. Rats were a constant menace. According to a castle record, a rat invasion destroyed an entire winter's supply of cheese. The flooding then occurred. Finding that your root cellar has transformed into an underground pool is the worst way to ruin your day. Speaking of preservation challenges, while these cellars were impressive, they weren't perfect, which is exactly why salt became medieval Europe's most valuable food preservation weapon. Ever wondered why we say someone's worth their salt or why we get a salary? In the past, salt was literally worth its weight in gold, as evidenced by these two expressions. The amount of the stuff that was used in medieval castles was staggering. According to records, just to keep their food fresh, a typical sized castle would use up to 5,000 pounds of salt annually. That's enough salt to fill a small bedroom. The master of the castle's salt. Yes, that was a real job. Knew exactly which type of salt worked best for different foods. Fine white salt was perfect for preserving dairy and delicate meats, while coarse sea salt was the go-to for tough cuts and fish. The science behind it is pretty simple. Salt pulls water out of food and out of any bacteria trying to spoil it. No water means no spoilage, which means happy, well-fed castle residents. Salt merchants became the medieval equivalent of tech billionaires. One whole sheep could be purchased for 1 pound of good salt, and the most successful salt traders had entire ship fleets. Of course, this led to some creative salt crimes. Merchants who were caught selling counterfeit salt made from ground white stones are documented. Talk about elevating a battery and salt to new heights. Even salted foods were used as medicine by doctors in castle. Got a headache? Try some salted fish. Aches in your stomach? Preserved lemons might do the trick. Though considering medieval medical practices, the salt was probably the least weird thing they prescribed. However, castles didn't just keep their food fresh with salt. Sometimes they took a more smoky approach to preservation. The medieval castle smoking yard was like a prehistoric barbecue joint, minus the paper napkins and arguing about sauce recipes. In peak seasons, these dedicated smoking houses processed up to 200 pounds of meat per day outside the castle walls. They were far enough away to avoid fire hazards but close enough to monitor. According to court records, a 150-person castle required approximately 18,000 pounds of smoked meat to survive the winter. No wonder the smoking houses were guarded. Someone would not want to steal your winter's supply of smoked bacon. Each type of wood used for smoking brought its own special flavor to the party. Oak was the go-to choice for most meats. It burned steadily and produced a rich, dark smoke that could keep meat fresh for up to 4 months. Applewood got saved for special occasions, perfect for smoking wild boar or venison for the Lord's fancy feasts. Alderwood was the fish's best friend, giving salmon and trout that delicate, smoky taste we still love today. The smoke master of the castle knew precisely when and what kind of wood to use. Timing was everything in the smoking game. Late autumn saw the smoking houses working overtime, with 3 to 4 smoking chambers running simultaneously. The procedure took some time. Hams took up to 3 months to fully cure, while some cuts of meat sat in the smoke for weeks. Castle records show smoke masters working in shifts, keeping the fires going day and night. The funny thing is, many of these medieval smoking techniques aren't that different from what modern barbecue masters use. The primary distinction: medieval smoke masters didn't have to worry about posting the perfect brisket pic on social media. While smoke worked wonders for meat and fish, vegetables needed a different approach, one that involved a lot more effort. The kitchens of medieval castles elevated pickling to a whole new level. Archaeologists have uncovered massive pickling vessels in castle ruins that could hold up to 100 gallons at a time, enough to pickle 800 pounds of vegetables simultaneously. That's a lot of pickles from the past. According to Dover Castle's records, they pickled between 40% and 60% of their annual vegetable harvest, making their castle gardens a year-round source of vitamin C. Cucumbers and onions, however, are unnecessary. Pickled everything they could, the cooks at the castle. Cabbage, of course. Turnips. Yes, I bet. Juice from beets and eggs. Absolutely. Additionally, they took on a striking purple hue, which is likely what caused a number of the castle children to giggle at dinner. Some castles even pickled imported fruits like lemons and oranges, treating them as precious commodities that only the lord and his family got to enjoy. One medieval cookbook mentions a cranky baron who threatened to throw his cook in the dungeon for serving his specially pickled plums to the common soldiers. The gardens of the castle weren't just for show. They dedicated whole sections to growing herbs specifically for pickling. Dill, garlic and mustard seeds were castle gardening staples, but the real MVP was vinegar production. Typically tucked away in a corner of the castle, each serious castle had its own vinegar production facility. Since fermenting vinegar doesn't smell like roses, let's face it. The pickling process was so important that many castles employed a dedicated pickle master who kept detailed records of every batch. These medieval recipe books survived centuries, showing us exactly how they did it. Surprisingly advanced were some of their methods. They knew that adding grape leaves to pickle jars would keep the vegetables crispy, a trick many modern picklers still use today. When we talk about methods of preservation that have stood the test of time, there was one delightful solution that medieval castles couldn't get enough of. In fact, it's so stable that archaeologists have found it still edible after thousands of years. The people who lived in medieval castles were well aware of the supernatural preservation properties of honey, so they kept extensive beeyards about 1/4 mile away from their walls. These hives were strategically placed near flowering meadows and orchards, not just hidden away for safety's sake. There were approximately 100 hives in a typical castle's bee operation, which produced sufficient honey for medicine and food preservation. The only skilled workers outside of the fortress were the castle beekeepers, who resided in small cottages near their hives. They received additional ale rations. It appears that medieval people believed that drinking prevented bee stings and, surprisingly, paid well. Honey was used for a variety of treatments in the castle infirmary's distinct honey stores. Honey from the spring was used to treat coughs and wounds, while honey from the autumn was used to preserve fruits and meats. For sick patients, they even developed specialized honey-preserved foods. The medieval practice of honey-preserving fruits. Hospitals' version of candy for getting well soon. Speaking of preservation, the castle kitchen used honey in surprisingly creative ways. Fresh fruit is coated with heated honey, root vegetables are layered between honey-soaked linens, and even fish is packed in honey for long journeys. One book of medieval recipes shows how to use honey to preserve whole geese, but it doesn't say how they stopped hungry servants from taking spoonfuls of the sweet preserver. The science behind honey's ability to preserve food is pretty amazing. It has enough sugar to prevent bacteria from growing in it, natural hydrogen peroxide that kills germs, and an acidity high enough to kill most microbes. Additionally, bees add an enzyme that transforms it into honey superoxide, rendering it virtually indestructible. It's not surprising that beekeepers were valued just as highly as master builders in medieval castles. Another crucial aspect of food preservation in castles is brought up in all this construction-related talk. The very architecture of the castle itself, every stone, every passageway, every window had a part to play in keeping food fresh. With food storage, medieval castle builders were essentially playing Tetris. Every single room had to be carefully planned, from the massive grain silos that could hold 20,000 pounds of wheat to the tiny cheese caves that maintained perfect humidity. Even room sizes were determined by applying a unique mathematical formula to the population of the castle. They required approximately 1,000 square feet of specialized storage space for every 100 people. Their ventilation systems revealed the true genius. Castle builders created natural air conditioning using something called pressure differential ventilation. Fancy words for letting nature do the cooling work. From the deepest cellars to the highest towers, they constructed tall, narrow shafts. A vacuum effect was created when the wind blew across the tops of these shafts, drawing cool air from below. One castle in Wales was so good at this that servants would hang out in the storage rooms during summer to escape the heat. Pest control was built right into the walls. Builders installed special ledges and barriers that rats couldn't climb, created angled walls that made it hard for mice to run up, and even included herbs, which are natural pesticides, in the mortar mix. In order to allow their furry exterminators to patrol between walls, they occasionally constructed cat runs, which were confined passageways that could only be accessed by cats. From a simple room with a fire to an intricate system of specialized spaces, the castle kitchen itself evolved. The pantry is for bread and dry goods, the buttery is for drinks, and the spicery is for expensive spices. Each had its own humidity and ventilation controls. There were even rooms in some castles just for aging cheese, with shelves that were angled to let the whey drain properly. Though one castle steward complained in writing about the cheese room being too close to the lord's chambers. It seems that some aged cheeses weren't quite right for noble noses, but even the most clever architecture was pointless if the right people didn't run it. Enter the small army of workers who kept this massive food preservation machine running smoothly. The kitchen in a medieval castle was like running a small town. The kitchen staff hierarchy started with the master cook. The massive food operation was managed by approximately 50 employees, 15 of whom were devoted to food preservation and storage. According to one castle's annual salary records, they paid their preservation master, a skilled cook, the equivalent of 30 sheep. Not bad for keeping the nobles' dinner from spoiling. The kitchen apprentices started young, usually around age 12. Before touching a cooking pot, they spent 2 years learning crucial preservation skills, like how to tell if meat was going bad by smell. The difficult first day on the job, how to rotate food stocks, and how to prevent those annoying nobles from over-consuming the winter preserves. One apprentice's diary, in which he laments having to memorize 200 different storage rules, has survived. Inventory tracking was seamlessly integrated into daily kitchen operations before being permitted to handle anything other than turnips. Head cooks used parchment records, tally sticks, and wooden sticks with notches for marking amounts. There was a distinct method for tracking each kind of food. Wine barrels got chalk marks, grain got measured by standardized scoops, and preserved meats each got numbered tags. Even loaded dice were found in the vicinity of the hearth in archaeological excavations. Anyone else liked to gamble during breaks, and wrote recipes on the walls of the kitchen. As organized as the kitchen system was, it faced its biggest test when the seasons changed. Food preservation faced new challenges throughout the year. The medieval food preservation calendar kicked off in spring with a frenzy of pickling and smoking the last winter stores just as they were starting to turn. By early summer, castle kitchens were processing fresh herbs, drying them in bundles from the rafters. Summer brought a parade of fruits and vegetables that needed preserving. Kitchen records show one castle processed over 2,000 pounds of fresh produce in a single August week. Autumn was preservation crunch time. Smoking, salting, and pickling were all handled simultaneously by different teams in the castle kitchen, which transformed into a continuous preservation factory. Even preservation festivals were held, and the entire staff of the castle participated. However, records indicate that these festivals were more about drinking ale than they were about storing food. A cook who accidentally pickled his keys after a particularly festive preservation party is mentioned in a castle document. Winter brought its own challenges. The master cook at the castle was responsible for meticulously determining how much preserved food to use each week. When people gave too much money in December, March would be hard. According to the castle's records, winter was divided into 3 parts. Grocery stores early in the winter, while they could still make use of the most recent preserved foods. Deep reserves midwinter, when they relied on longer-lasting preserves, and scraping by late winter, when meals got creative with whatever was left. Weather watching became a crucial skill. The staff at the castle developed intricate weather pattern prediction systems that recorded everything from cloud shapes to animal behavior. Medieval weather forecasting at its finest. One cook wrote that if the mice started stealing more food before the first frost, the winter would be harsh. However, even with the best seasonal planning, there is always a chance that things will go horribly wrong. When things went wrong, the famous siege of Dover Castle in 1216 tested their food preservation system like never before. The castle held out for over 3 months, largely thanks to their stored food supplies. But it wasn't just about having enough, it was about keeping what they had edible. During the siege, the kitchen staff had to quickly move a lot of preserved food to higher ground when the main cellar of the castle flooded. They managed it in a single night, though one unfortunate cook got locked in a storage room for 6 hours during the rush. Kitchen records reveal some creative emergency solutions. When rats chewed through grain storage bags, cooks started storing them in sealed clay pots. After mold destroyed an entire season's cheese supply at one castle, they developed a new system of rotating cheese wheels daily and rubbing them with vinegar. Quality control in the Middle Ages evolved into a serious business. Food tasters didn't just check for poison, they checked for spoilage too. It took skill to spot spoiled food. Cooks used all their senses. The sound of tapping on preserves jars. Different sounds meant different things. The feel of cured meats. Trouble meant being too soft. Even the color of pickled vegetables, according to a cook's guide. If your pickled eggs turn green, feed them to your enemy. They did, at least, have a sense of humor regarding food safety. Castle records show they lost about 20% of preserved food to spoilage each year. Not bad, considering they had no refrigeration. When preserves did go bad, they had backup plans, sprouting grains in castle windowsills, smoking whatever meat they could find, and turning questionable wine into vinegar. It is amazing how many of these medieval methods of preservation we still use today. These old preservation methods weren't just about keeping food from spoiling. They created unique flavors that we still crave today. That smoky taste in your fancy ham. Think a medieval smoke master. At the farmer's market, those handmade pickles. They are following recipes that are familiar to castle cooks. Even your grandmother's secret method of keeping vegetables fresh might have medieval roots.